Hey guys, in the last video in part 1, we analyzed the difference between Alcaraz's backhand and Djokovic's backhand and highlighted some of the key issues that Alcaraz has in his preparation. In today's video, we're going to be comparing Alcaraz's backhand to Djokovic and Zverev's backhand, particularly the tail end of the backswing, going really into detail about the differences that are really preventing Alcaraz's backhand from being an elite backhand. I think he has a decent backhand, but it's not anything super special. And I really think that if he improves his backhand technique, implementing some of the things in this video, that's literally the difference between him winning 10 Grand Slams and 20 Grand Slams. Because I think he has everything else. He's an amazing player, amazing athlete, one of the best forehands of all time, but he's really just lacking this one critical aspect. And if he just fixes his backhand, man, he's going to be one of the greatest of all time players. All right, so let's get right into it. Analyzing the racket drop, the first thing I noticed is Alcaraz doesn't really drop the racket head much at all. In fact, he barely drops it below parallel to ground level. It's only 10 degrees below that. Whereas if you look at Djokovic and Sinner, they will be 45 degrees or more, sometimes even 60, 70 degrees below parallel to ground level. And a good reference point is having your racket be in line with the upper arm. Okay, so his racket should be closer to here ideally for optimal control and spin. Alcaraz's backhand is pretty flat. He can rip it down the line pretty well. But I notice he lacks some consistency and control over the shot, especially in high pressure situations. And I think his lack of an adequate racket drop is one of the primary reasons. See how he kind of just goes straight into it? He doesn't really dip his racket below the shot. And if you look at most of the weak backhands, pancake backhands like Del Potro, Kyrgios, Tomic, a little bit of Tommy Paul, and Cameron Norrie, they all have this similar feature where they don't really drop their racket head below parallel to ground level. Alcaraz is at least dropping it somewhat. So anatomically, how do we drop our rackets? It's going to look like this. So that means the right wrist, the bottom hand, is going to be mostly doing wrist flexion. Flexion is not this, that's actually extension. Flexion is when you point it down. So it's going to do some wrist flexion, and then the top hand is going to turn and rotate down like this towards my pinky. That's called ulnar deviation. So we're going to combine both those two to really get that significant racket drop that Sinner and Djokovic gets. All right. So the problem with Del Potro and those other players with pancake backhands we saw is they're having their wrists be too locked and stiff. Their right wrist is just pretty much neutral. It's not breaking. Okay. So it's both wrists facilitating, but especially you got to especially drop that right wrist. You'll notice Djokovic really looks like this. So I want to focus on the time frame between when his racket is at its highest position here to when the racket drops to around parallel to ground level. Okay? And during that time frame, I want you to check out Djokovic's left elbow and notice how during that time frame it isn't really moving forward. Okay, maybe very slightly, but it's kind of hanging back there. And his arm is gradually straightening. Okay, it only gets fully straight at this point when his racket is reaching parallel to ground level. Let's check out Zverev now. Zverev has a more similar starting position to in that his left elbow is kind of higher than Djokovic's. And again, notice from this position, from fully loaded till when his racket is parallel to ground level, so here, look at his left elbow. Does it really move forward? Is it moving forward towards the net up until this point, or is he just dropping his racket behind him? Now, let's check out Alcaraz. Okay, so now we're going to look at Alcaraz in the same position. Here is when he's maximally fully coiled and loaded, and we're going to go to when his racket reaches ground level, so here. And I want you to notice the difference between Alcaraz and Djokovic and Zverev's left elbow. Notice the difference. Notice how Alcaraz's left elbow is drifting forward already before it's reached parallel to ground level. So let's watch. His elbow started here, right? His elbow started here, and then it's already drifted forward by quite a few inches. You see that? He's also straightening out his arm earlier than Zverev and Djokovic, because we saw that Zverev and Djokovic straightened their arms out when the racket was around parallel to ground level. But we can see that Alcaraz starts with his left elbow bent. But notice how at this position he's already straightened his left elbow. So even before his racket has reached that horizontal position, he has already locked out. And the significance of that is what's causing some of his backhand issues. Yeah, so you really don't want to lock out your elbow too soon. I believe if you lock out your elbow too soon, then that's like the equivalent of shooting a basketball and just straightening out your arm way too early. You know, there's a time where it needs to be bent and a time to straighten it. And if you lock out your elbow too soon, then you're missing out on potential power. So I want to break down what Alcaraz is doing. He's starting here, and then we saw in the slow motion clips that before his racket has dropped to the point where his racket is parallel to ground level like this, he has already started straightening and pulling his left elbow forward. And I believe the two are hand in hand. This is the key realization I had, all right? What Alcaraz is doing really is he is externally rotating his left arm. External rotation is where if I keep my elbow fixed, right, and I move my left hand out to the side like this, that's external rotation. This is internal, external. So here, if I go like this, notice how when I externally rotate, my elbow comes in towards my body, right? It comes in, it starts to go forward this way. So that's what Alcaraz is doing, like this. If we look at Djokovic and Zverev, though, we saw that from the maximally loaded position, around here, as they're going down, their elbow doesn't move forward like this. It gradually straightens, whereas Alcaraz was pretty much straightening before his racket even got to this position. So it gradually straightens, but their elbow isn't really moving forward. It's not doing this thing, right? So it's going like this, and it's only once the racket reaches around parallel to ground level that the elbow starts coming forward, okay? The reason why this is so important is because if I'm externally rotating like this and straightening my arm and pulling the racket head forward using that means I'm using my own muscle power to bring the racket forward, as opposed to what Djokovic and Zverev are doing is by just simply dropping the racket head like this, they're just using the power of gravity. So they're getting to use extra power from gravity, and then they go forward. Whereas Alcaraz, he's not getting that extra benefit of gravity helping him when the racket just drops on its own. But I want to make it very clear that you are going to externally rotate at some point, but Alcaraz is just doing it too soon, okay? He's doing it before he's let his racket head drop to this point. He's doing it before. So he's going like this. Djokovic and Zverev and all the pros, they do externally rotate. Now, when do they do that? Only after the racket head has dropped somewhat, which is till around this point, as I was saying, when the racket head is parallel to ground level. Only after that point do they externally rotate. So what do I mean by externally rotate? Again, that means you do this motion where your elbow comes in a little bit and your hand goes out towards the side. But again, you have to let your racket drop first. And now that my racket head is dropped till it's parallel to ground level and my left arm is straight, now we can externally rotate. And how do I know that they're externally rotating? I know that because, well, if I'm internally rotated like this, right? Here I'm internally rotated. As you transition from the end of your backswing to your forward swing, you have to externally rotate if you want to get optimal power, all right? And I know that Djokovic and Zverev are externally rotating because that's how they're getting racket lag, right? Because if I'm internally rotated like this is internal rotation, right? Where my hand is towards my body center. Notice how I'm internally rotated right now and I can't really lag my racket back, all right? But if I externally rotate, look how much more racket lag I can get. So if you look at guys like Sinner, who really get their racket tip behind them, that's because they're doing a ton of left arm external rotation. You see that? If I internally rotate, again, like this, then look, I'm already at my max. I can't lag back any further than this. Whereas if I externally rotate, I can go back way further. So Djokovic and Zverev are externally rotating, okay? They're just not doing it so soon. They're not doing it from up here like Alcaraz is doing. Now imagine on the forehand, what Alcaraz is doing on the backhand would be the equivalent of, on the forehand, from this position, bringing my elbow forward and straightening it before my racket head has started to drop, all right? So we want to let the racket head drop and use some of that gravity power before starting to externally rotate, right? This is external rotation, right? We don't want to, from here, start externally rotating too soon because then we haven't used the momentum from gravity, right? So it's a similar thing on the backhand. In a nutshell, Alcaraz is externally rotating and straightening his arm too soon before his racket head has reached parallel to ground level, whereas Djokovic and Zverev, they're first dropping their racket to ground level and then they're externally rotating, right? And by doing that, they get to use gravity's power because the racket head drops, whereas Alcaraz is pulling with his own muscle. All right, fellow tennis enthusiasts, thank you so much for watching. This wraps up this segment of the video because it's getting kind of long. There will be a part 3 where I focus on the contact phase of Alcaraz's backhand and compare it to Djokovic and other top backhands. I know some parts of this video were a bit repetitive and did a lot of demonstrations, but just wanted to make it super clear what's going on a technical level. And I'll definitely continue to bring as much knowledge and gems as possible in future videos. So make sure to like and comment your thoughts. I'll try to reply. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on my social media. All right, guys. Peace. Thank you for watching.